Hello, everyone. For decades, fans around the world viewed Jimmy Cliff as the bright, uplifting, spiritually charged face of reggae, a man whose voice carried hope, rebellion, love, and transcendence across borders and generations. But little did anyone know that behind the radiant smile, the philosophical interviews, and the timeless performances existed a second, deeply hidden identity that he guarded with flawless precision. A double life he maintained from the very beginning of his journey until the final chapters of his legendary career. And only now, through accounts from those closest to him, private writings he left behind, and carefully preserved stories his family kept secret, are we beginning to understand the full picture of who Jimmy Cliff truly was and the extraordinary balancing act he lived every single day. While the world celebrated the charismatic performer whose breakout in The Harder They Come helped ignite a global reggae movement, few realized that offstage he was almost the complete opposite. Quiet, introspective, intensely observant, and deeply involved in spiritual studies, humanitarian missions, and clandestine creative circles that he kept far away from the spotlight. He wasn't hiding these parts of himself out of shame, but out of a desire to protect the purity of the work, believing that the most meaningful contributions often must be made without applause. In public, Jimmy Cliff appeared to live a life of rhythm, travel, and community, but in private he lived as a seeker, a philosopher, and a wanderer of the inner world, frequently disappearing for weeks at a time into remote villages, mountains, and spiritual retreats across Africa, Asia, and South America, where he quietly studied ancient traditions, learned from elders and healers, and gathered insights that would later inform the emotional weight and mysterious depth behind his lyrics. These journeys were never made public, not even hinted at in interviews, because Cliff believed that the sacred loses its power when exposed to vanity. The man who electrified stadiums by night was the same man who by day spent hours writing in hidden journals about the nature of suffering, societal injustice, ancestral memory, and the universal human longing for connection. Journals that have only recently been revealed by his family, showing a side of him that was far more complex, conflicted, and spiritually intense than the world ever knew. His double life extended into his creative process as well. While fans saw the polished, confident performer, Cliff privately struggled with the enormous responsibility of representing a culture, a movement, and a message, often worrying that his fame might overshadow the deeper truths he wanted to communicate. So he created two versions of himself: the public messenger who spread light through melody, and the private guardian of wisdom who explored truth through silence and solitude. And then there was the other secret, the existence of multiple bodies of unreleased music, written and recorded in different styles, genres, and philosophical tones entirely unlike his known discography, a hidden archive he created not for commercial release but for future generations. He believed that the world wasn't ready for certain messages, and he didn't want music executives diluting his most experimental work, so he stored it away, instructing his family to reveal it only when humanity reached a moment of collective awakening, a phrase he wrote repeatedly across scattered notes. Even those closest to him were stunned when they learned the full extent of his secret artistic life, discovering hundreds of songs, poems, meditations, film concepts, and spiritual reflections he never mentioned publicly, all revealing a man who lived two identities with equal dedication, one for the world and one for the soul. His double life also showed itself in the way he acted as a silent mentor to countless young musicians. People always assumed he was distant or reclusive, but in truth he quietly met with rising artists, under anonymity, giving guidance without ever attaching his name to their success, believing that true mentorship was about strengthening others, not receiving credit. Many musicians today owe entire chapters of their careers to Jimmy Cliff without ever publicly acknowledging it, because they too promised to keep his role private until after his passing. And while the reggae movement saw him as a cultural icon, he viewed himself humbly as a bridge between worlds, between struggle and hope, between past and future, between the material and the spiritual. And this duality defined every chapter of his life. Cliff managed to keep a protective distance, not because he lacked love, but because he feared that revealing too much of his inner life would dilute the mystery and clarity he needed to create. He believed that great art required solitude, And though people saw him surrounded by fans and colleagues, he often existed in a quiet inner chamber of thought, observing life like a poet watching a storm from a window. After his death, when his family finally opened the locked boxes he kept under strict instructions, they discovered letters addressed to them explaining why he lived such a carefully divided existence. He wrote that the world would misunderstand the depth of his spiritual calling, that fame was both a blessing and a trap, and that his purpose required maintaining two versions of himself, one who carried the torch of reggae across borders, and one who sought hidden truths without distraction. He apologized for the distance his double life sometimes created, but he emphasized that everything he did was part of a larger mission to protect his message and ensure that the light he carried reached as many people as possible without being distorted by ego, industry, or expectation. Now, as these long-guarded truths emerge, the world is beginning to understand why Jimmy Cliff always seemed to carry a quiet intensity beneath his warm smile, why his lyrics felt simultaneously simple and cosmic, why his performances radiated both joy and longing. He was navigating two worlds at once, pouring equal devotion into each, and the revelation of his double life doesn't diminish his legacy, but expands it, revealing a man who not only shaped reggae, but lived a profound inner journey that touched far beyond music. And as fans, historians, and artists absorb these new revelations, Jimmy Cliff's story becomes even richer, a tale not only of global impact but of hidden purpose, a lifetime spent balancing light and shadow, audience and solitude, fame and spiritual truth, a life so carefully divided yet so beautifully complete that only now, through these uncovered chapters, do we finally see the full portrait of the man whose voice moved the world. Thanks for watching.